Welcome back to another episode of Biblio Files, a show from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan that's all about books. Each episode, we take a few minutes to answer one book-related question. This time, the question is, what's a great book about books? And I'm here with Lucy and Amanda, and my name's Christopher. Amanda, what did you pick for us this time?
Thanks, Christopher. I know all of us love books and talking about books, and books about books have this magical sense about them. There's books that are set in bookstores, books that are set in libraries, just books about books. And I just chose a book about a book that was from a bookstore. The book I chose is called Notes from a Public Typewriter. It is written by Michael Gustafson with Oliver Uberti. And this book was published in 2018. And for those of you who are familiar with Ann Arbor, Michael Gustafson is co-owner of Literati Bookstore here in downtown Ann Arbor. And this book was published in 2018. And the book talks about his story of the bookstore being born, how typewriters came to be involved. Because if you know about the bookstore, the logo has a typewriter on it. And there's a typewriter in the lower level of the bookstore where people are welcome to sit down and type something. So when they opened up the bookstore, he had the idea of making a community building experiment. And so in his words, he says, what if people could walk into a bookstore and type anything they wanted? Would people even know how to use a typewriter? So it was a bit of a social experiment. And on the day they opened, he put out the typewriter and he put in a blank sheet of paper and somebody typed, "Thank you for being here." So that was sort of how it all started. I love typewriters. I love the analog age. I think there's something romantic and poetic about typing on a typewriter. And the book talks a little bit about that. And it goes into the history of the typewriters that have been in the shop, how they're tied to his family and his grandfather. And it's a really cool experiment. And I'm glad it was so successful because the typewriter in that shop has been so iconic as part of the identity of that bookstore. I also love the idea that a blank page in a typewriter, it's cathartic. You can type anything. So that's what the book talks about. It's a pretty thin little book. There are pieces of him telling the story about the books in the typewriter in the bookstore. And then it has a lot of very simple images or simple pages where you can see some of the things people have typed over the years. It's very sparse. So it's a quick read. It's delightful. It's a great book for gift giving or just to skim through it. I read this a while ago when it first came out, and I reread it recently, just getting ready for the show. And I enjoyed it. I love that poetic, love we can have for something that's analog or no longer accessible. And then once the typewriter is in the shop for a while and it breaks, how do you fix it? It's a typewriter. Typewriters are pretty rare nowadays. So after having the typewriter in the shop for a while, Michael had the idea of putting them up on the walls. So he commissioned Oliver Uberti, who co-wrote the book, to paint them on the outside of the building. So if you're walking around, you can see the typewriter notes written on the same of the building. And if you live in Ann Arbor, you already know most of what I'm telling you. But if you haven't experienced the bookstore or the typewriter or want to know more, or just love typewriters and just the vibe of a bookstore, this book has all of that for you. So the book is Notes from a Public Typewriter by Michael Gustafson with Oliver Uberti. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Lucy.
So I picked a piece of fiction. It is actually a novella, and it is by the author Alan Bennett, and I think it was written in about 2006. He is a British playwright and novelist and a pretty funny person. And The Uncommon Reader is a book that asks the question, what if the Queen of England became an avid reader? And there's a lot of reasons this question is kind of funny. First of all, the Queen is not really allowed to have hobbies because that implies preference. And so she can't, have a preference for one thing over the other. And also, even in this country, we're obsessed with the Queen of England, but in their country, they love the royals, but she's not really a human person. So the story starts, she's out walking her corgis, because we know the Queen loves horses and she loves her corgis. Her corgis get unruly, they get away from her, and she stumbles upon a bookmobile. She feels obliged to go in and check out a book when she figures out what it is. She's not a reader at all. She reads the first book, it's kind of a slog, but she goes back to return it, and then she feels obligated to get another one. So she reads the second book, and then all of a sudden it just becomes this habit. And she realizes what she's been missing, and she becomes an avid reader. And she works her way through like biographies and Proust, and she starts to pick up reading over hunting. And all her people around her, her courtiers, kind of, they don't like the habit. They think that reading is elitist. They wonder if she's suffering from dementia. And because they don't really see the queen as a person, it becomes very disarming. And it's funny, the way he writes it is very funny, but the queen will meet with like the president of France, or be in the car with her chauffeur and be like, what have you read recently? What are you enjoying reading? And it is off-putting to everybody. And then she starts to regret that she's not had this lifetime of reading. How can she ever make up for it? And she talks about like sitting down with famous authors and never having read their works, or sitting down with other people and what if she had been able to read their biography ahead of time? She says, I always got these briefs. Briefs are the opposite of books. Like briefs kind of condense everything down. So you get the one point, they close doors. And she has this line where she says, as far as books, like doors kept opening wherever she turned. And the days weren't long enough for the reading she wanted to do. So she just sees books as opening up her world. She's a very funny reader. Like she'll read Henry James and says like, oh, do get on. It's just, but the book humanizes the queen and turns her into this enduring character. And she has sort of a transformation through reading. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about it is I think he's satirizing the royal family a lot, but really, I believe what Alan Bennett is doing in this very short, very funny book is talking about the power of good books and how transformative they can be. And I've read this book a couple times. It's very short, and I love it because I truly believe that like books can transform you, and that they can, that to see someone stumble across a bookmobile, I fully believe that any person, if they had the right book in their hands, would become an avid reader. So it doesn't take long to read. It's highly enjoyable. And if you love books and you believe books are life like I do, then this is a good book for you to read. So that is The Uncommon Reader by Alan Bennett. And Christopher, what did you pick?
Well, what a great topic we have for today. This has really been a lot of fun to hear about these two books. I chose a book of nonfiction, and I know I say this a lot, but this show is a great excuse to go back in something I'd been meaning to read, which is The Professor and the Madman. This is not the iconic cover that we're so used to seeing now, but this is a copy from the library, and it was written by Simon Winchester. So The Professor and the Madman is a true story of the founding of the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. And it starts very dramatically with Murray, who is putting the dictionary together, and he wants to go visit one of the leading contributors to the dictionary. So you have to remember, this is a pre-computer age. And the first edition of the OED, I think, took 70 years to write. So this is a very long process. And Murray is going to visit the main contributor to this dictionary. This contributor has been putting Murray off for many years. And finally, Murray says, I have to meet you. And he goes to an address. And it turns out that Minor, who is this contributor, is a permanent resident of an insane asylum. And so the story goes on from there with the biography of these two main characters, two main heroes in the story, although this is nonfiction, and then goes into the construction of the OED and the whole process that it takes. It turns out that Minor was convicted of murdering someone, but he's also a kind of paranoid, delusional person, and that's why he is in an insane asylum. He's also an American, which is fascinating. So There are so many wrinkles to this story, and it's a fascinating, fast, short read. And it's wonderful for anyone who loves words, who loves books and the OED. It really shows the very unstuffy side and history to what this dictionary is. Also, we love to talk about movies. I have not seen the film adaptation of this book, but it is out there. I think it is Sean Penn and who played the original Mad Max, famous Australian actor?
Mel Gibson?
Mel Gibson. I believe it's Mel Gibson and Sean Penn who made the film adaptation of this. So I'd love to see that now and see what I think of it. Any last thoughts on books about books?
Well, I think after today, I'm even more in love with books and words and reading and talking about books. All three of our books were so different, but they all encapsulate that love and passion and how transformative like words and letters on a page can be. So I'm so glad we talked about this today.
I know.
This is a great topic. And we would love to find out some of your favorite books about books. You can leave a comment in the link below on the AADL website, and we'd love to hear from you. So until next time, take care.